Froggie Went A Courtin, a 16th century folk song. It's a love song. It goes something like this. I'd like to hear it go. Froggie went a courtin', he did right, Froggie went a courtin', he did right, Froggie went a courtin', he did right, sword and pistol by his side, Rode right up to Miss Mouse's door, Rode right up to Miss Mouse's door, He rode right up to Miss Mouse's door, gave 3 raps and a very loud roar, He said, Miss Mouse, are you within, He said, Miss Mouse, are you within, He said, Miss Mouse, are you within? Yes, kind sir, I sit and spin, He took Miss Mousey on his knee, He took Miss Mousey on his knee, He took Miss Mousey on his knee. Said, Miss Mousey, would you marry me? Well, without my Uncle Rat's consent, Without my Uncle Rat's consent, no sir. Without my Uncle Rat's consent, I would not marry the president, Well, Uncle Rat just laughed and shook his fat sides. Uncle Rat, he laughed and shook his fat sides, Uncle Rat, he laughed and shook his fat sides. Think his niece would be a bride, Uncle Rat went running down to town, He did. Uncle Rat went running down to town, Uncle Rat went running down to town to buy his niece a wedding gown, Well, what will the wedding supper be, What will the wedding supper be, What will the wedding supper be? A fried mosquito and the black-eyed pea, And where will the wedding supper be, Where will the wedding supper be, Where will the wedding supper be? Way down yonder in a hollow tree, Well, the first come in was a flying moth, Well, the first come in was a flying moth, Well, the first come in was a flying moth, and she laid out the tablecloth, Next come in was a Junie bug, Next come in was a Junie bug, Next come in was a Junie bug, put some whiskey in a water jug, Well, next come in was a bumblebee, Next come in was a bumblebee, That's the way Woody said it. Next come in was a bumblebee, and he laid his fiddle on his knee, Well, next come in was a broken back flea, Next come in was a broken back flea, Next come in was a broken back flea, dance a jig with a bumblebee, Well, next come in was Mrs. Cow, Next come in was Mrs. Cow, She ought to pick on somebody her own size. Next come in was Mrs. Cow, She tried to dance but didn't know how, Well, next come in was a big black tick, Place getting crowded. Next come in was a big black tick, Well, next come in was a big black tick, and he ate so much that it made him sick, So they called in old Dr. Fly, Next come in was Dr. Fly, Yeah, next come in was Dr. Fly, said Mr. Tick would surely die, Wedding's turning bad. Next come in was a long black snake, Here's it get worse. Next come in was a big black snake, Well, next come in was a big black snake, and he ate up all the wedding cake, Next come in was an old gray cat, Next come in was an old gray cat, Next come in was an old gray cat. He swallowed the mouse and ate up the rat. That's worse than getting stood up at the altar when your wife gets eaten. It's bad. Well, Mr. Frog went hopping over the brook, Mr. Frog went hopping over the brook, just drowned his sorrows. Well, Mr. Frog went hopping over the brook and a lily white duck came and swallowed him up, Little piece of cornbread laying on the shelf, There's a little piece of cornbread laying on the shelf, There's a little piece of cornbread laying on the shelf. If you want any more, you can sing it yourself.